Before today's episode, just want to let our listeners know that there are several references to sexual assault and specifically sexual assault against minors. So we understand that this might be a difficult topic for some. So if it is for you, you might want to go ahead and skip this episode. Help is available if you need it at the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673. Welcome to Who Are You, a CSI podcast. I am Lauren, and I've seen CSI through and through around 3 to 4 times.
And I'm Nick, and this is my first time watching these episodes.
And today we are reviewing Season 2, Episode 3, Overload. Episode air date is October 11th, 2001. Director is Richard J. Lewis. Writers are Anthony E. Zeiker and Josh Berman. And we open up with a few shots of the Vegas strips. So,
quite a few, in fact.
Yeah, I was going to say, so what is our Vegas score for
I just realized that I didn't total it up because we also have two interceding shots later on.
They do a few segue shots of Vegas.
So we end up with 35 out of a possible 55.
Oh, okay.
So we're over the 50% mark. Yeah, there's 5 different scenes totaling about 20 seconds.
All right.
There's two other points where we get like one scene for 3 or 4 seconds.
Yeah.
That is our highest so far in season 2.
Okay.
We're over the 50% Vegas mark, which is good. It's kind of like Lake Mead. We're slowly filling back up.
Yeah. Slowly. We're getting there. We'll see what episode 4 brings us. So we go from shots of the Vegas Strip to a building being constructed. A truck pulls up, and then womp womp, a body falls.
I want to know whose brother needed a new SAG card for that truck that pulls up and says one weird thing with the traffic, and then you don't see him again.
No, he never shows up again. And then we go to Grissom at the construction site, and the sheriff is baffled because he didn't call Grissom to the site. But Grissom overheard the news and showed up anyway, even though the sheriff did not request him.
I've decided Grissom has a little bit of like Star Trek captain in him because there is no reason.
Kirk.
Well, there's just no reason to be going on away missions if you're
That's
the captain of a starship.
That's true.
And yet he's always he's running out of the office. He doesn't want to do his paperwork and into the field at a moment's notice. It's like that's not what the head guy should be doing. He should be sending somebody.
Yeah, he should be delegating.
Yeah, it's like
I'm a manager. Sometimes you got to delegate.
Yeah, Kirk should not be going on every away mission.
Right.
And bringing his senior staff with him.
Right.
And then one expendable red shirt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the sheriff is saying Grissom doesn't need to be there because obviously the victim jumped. It was a suicide. And Grissom poses the question of, if this was a suicide, why would he spend his last day at work?
Yes.
But let me counter that. Maybe that's the only high place he could have jumped off of.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I kind of had that on the second watch through. I was kind of like, yeah.
But spoiler alert, he didn't jump. But well, if that was going to be your mode, he might live in a 1-story house. He might not have easy access to a high building.
So sort of double down on the spoiler. That the reason this crossed my mind in the second episode is that the way that they set the stage, I imagine he just started his shift.
Yes.
Right?
It kind of seems that way.
He would have showed up, and the first time he went to use his tool,
right?
What
else is he doing up there?
Electrocuted and killed.
Yes.
So he didn't really come to work. He came to a place, jumped off of if you forget the fact that you know all this other stuff and you think about it objectively, then the assumption is he showed up to work and went up to the floor alone, and within seconds,
jumped.
He came falling down off the side.
Right.
So everyone on the site was like, "Oh my god, he just went up there and jumped."
Right.
And so I think that's the kind of. I think good episode of CSI, it would have been somebody would have said, "Well, he just got here, Grissom. It's not like he went to work at all today."
Right.
Or so, you know what I mean? And then as you unraveled, that would have been one of the clues. Oh yeah, how did it happen so suddenly? Right. Oh, because it was a setup because of this other thing. And so that's, I think, the difference between a good CSI episode and
a
everything else I'm trying not to prejudge.
Our big middle ground.
Yeah, I'm trying not to judge the episode in the first 2 minutes of recording,
Yep.
but it's definitely not going to be in my top three.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fair. So we then go to credits and we return to Grissom with the sheriff and a Mr. Harris. And they're in like a service, like a work elevator. And we learned that Valenti, the victim, had the entire floor that he was working on, so he was the only one up there. And Grissom is looking over from where he assumed he fell/jumped from, and he finds a drill hanging. Yep. So he pulls the drill up, and we realize that it shorted out. So that immediately brings up then he was electrocuted.
Missed a really good opportunity for Grissom Corp, right? Which is like, well, if he jumped, why is his drill hanging off the side of it? You know what I mean?
Right. Wouldn't you put the drill down and then jumped? You wouldn't have jumped with your drill and then like released it as you were jumping.
But they don't even do that. Like, I think as the audience, you might ask yourself that question, but like, usually they take the time to point that out.
Not today. So we learn that there's a system in place called GFCI, which should have prevented him from getting electrocuted. But we soon learn why that wouldn't take effect, for him at least, because the third prong of his drill was compromised, and you need that third prong to have that system work the way that it's supposed to work.
So I'm not an electrician, and I don't actually understand how all this works.
I am definitely not an electrician. I pay people to do that sort of work in my house, which you should anyway.
But. Yeah, there's ground fault, and nowadays we have this thing called arc fault interruption too. But if you have any of those, usually you have them in your bathroom, your kitchen because of water. There's switches with like a test button.
Yep.
So the first versions of those were GCFI. Okay. And a lot of times people have them on their breakers now. And I live in a relatively older house, and we have literally chosen not to do electrical work because to bring it up to code, you'd have to replace like
everything,
25 breakers with GCFI or I breakers or something, and they're like $70 a pop.
Oh man,
or something. I don't know. They're not cheap. It was like yeah, this job is like $500, but then we have to do all the other stuff, and so it's going to cost like $1,000. And we're like, so you're saying if I go to the store and buy one breaker and install it myself, I don't have to bring it up to code.
Again, we are not condoning that people do their own electric work. Just as a
there's a reason
fun
why
fact
people...
from your hosts here. We're not condoning you do your own electrical work.
Yeah, you can go to the DIY Reddit and someone else will condone that for you.
Mm-hmm. But not us.
I will say also that when I was house searching, a big red flag for buying a house was a bunch of stuff that looks like it was done by a homeowner instead of a licensed anything.
Yep.
People literally apprentice for years to be good at what they do. And,
right.
I think the trades are actually one of the coolest things about like American construction businesses.
Yeah. Support your trade workers and hire them instead of convincing yourself that you can do just as good of a job as they can. Because I can basically guarantee you
little stuff, you know what? You have to make that decision amongst yourself.
Right.
Anything big, you probably gotta regret it.
Yeah, get it.
Unless you're here, like if you're one of those guys and you already know what you're doing, you're not listening to me anyway. So
yeah, that's also true. Good point.
Or gals. I said guys. I use that term as folks. If you're one of those
as a folks. So Grissom finds a drill, and then he also finds a metal cutter. I thought that they were pliers at first. They're not pliers. They're some sort of metal cutter. And he prints them on scene. He just happened to bring the box and the equipment. But Nick just had a mobile little spray device.
Same device. Grissom and Nick, that Nick used in the college dorm room.
Was it the same device?
Yeah.
I thought it was a different device.
I remember thinking like, oh, does that ever come up again?
And I said no, because I thought this was a different device. So look at that.
Yeah. It's like I don't know what the smoke is. I'm gonna have to go look this up. This might be a real tool they use.
Yeah.
I probably won't look it up, but I'll pretend that I'm gonna go look it up someday. Yeah. But yeah, this is the second episode in a row where you've seen this smoky thing, which maybe if I did my research by now, this could be a product placement.
Oh, yeah, good point. We haven't had a product placement in a while. Yeah. I'm sure we'll loop back around to having one, but it's been a bit. Yeah. We head on over to storyline B with Catherine and Nick. They're arriving at a house. We learn that their victim is Dylan Buckley. He's 14 years old. As they're checking out the scene, a woman in white enters. We learn that this is Dr. Lee Sapien. She's a psychiatrist. It's her house that they're in, so they're not at the victim's house. They're at the psychiatrist's house. And we also learned that she has been treating him for something she labels reactive attachment disorder. And she's still telling the CSIs that he convulsed, he had a grand mal seizure, he's epileptic, he hit his head, that's how he died, right? Like,
Yeah.
done, no big deal, total accident.
So I have a few comments with this scene. First is, they literally give Catherine every crime with a child in it, I swear.
Yeah. Well, because she's the only parent.
Yeah.
So,
but like that doesn't.
But she's not the one that gets emotional in this one.
No, that's true. Actually, yeah.
She's not the foil. She's not the usual foil in this one.
Yeah, real left field subplot here from Nick.
Yeah, we'll get there. For those who have been listening to us for a while, I will probably already have a warning at the beginning of this episode, just as certain people might be sensitive to certain topics, and I support that.
But while this is not my favorite very tall doctor that they've had on the
yes,
on the show.
Yes, yeah, she is very tall.
There's this whole exchange about like doctor-patient confidentiality.
Yes, and they're like, well, it doesn't matter because he's dead.
And then she's like, all right, I'll tell you whatever. And all I can think is like, why would you say that if you knew that was the case?
Right.
How suspicious is that?
Yeah. So they end up lifting some fibers off of the psychiatrist. This comes back later. We then head on over to Grissom with Doc Robbins. Doc Robbins is telling Grissom there's no evidence of electrocution. This body is not showing any signs of an electrocution. Grissom, not having it. He's saying, nope, this isn't an accident. Like, this isn't... He jumped like he was, Grissom is doing what he always tells everybody else not to do.
Yeah.
Which comes up in the next scene. So we go to Grissom with Sarah. Sarah's telling him, like, she's not sure what she's looking for. Because usually they go to the body. But Grissom isn't listening to the body. And Grissom, that's what he always tells them. Like, listen to the body. Let the body guide you.
Follow the evidence.
Follow the evidence. And Grissom basically is like, well, sometimes you have to do the exact opposite.
Yeah. Which explains Grissom a lot. Because he often does the
opposite.
Does.
He does. This is true. This is, while strange, actually firming up some holes in Grissom's behavior. So
very, very on brand.
As they're looking over some of the evidence, Grissom notes that the wires have been crossed, which to him proves that the drill has been tampered with. They also find a nail in the bottom of the boot, which might have broke the seal and actually allowed him to be electrocuted, because he wouldn't have had the rubber, the perfect rubber bottoms on his boots to protect him. So we go to Warwick. He's running palm prints. Sarah enters. They have a conversation about the odds that Grissom is wrong. So there seems to be some bets being placed as to how wrong Grissom is and what the consequences are going to be for Grissom for being wrong.
Yeah, different odds depending on the outcome.
Yes. Then we learn that the palm prints match Bob / Mr. Harris. So he was the one that touched the metal cutters, which transfers us to Grissom with the sheriff and Bob / Mr. Harris. And Bob is saying that he always inspects the tools. Like, that's just part of his job. Of course his handprint, of course his palm print's on the tool. He inspects the tools regularly. It's not a big deal.
I'm just envisioning him just going through a tool shed and taking out every hammer.
Yeah, just staring at it.
Is this screwdriver safe?
Yeah. But he somehow missed that the third prong was missing on the drill.
I think the idea is that just happened.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
But I also as you're plugging it in, this is more, and I'm not here to victim blame, guys, but do you not notice when you're plugging something in that the third prong is missing? Wouldn't you notice?
I don't know if I would.
I feel I would notice.
I don't know if I would not plug it in if I did notice.
But this is someone working on a construction site and OSHA and all that fun stuff that comes along with it.
It could also have already been plugged in.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, maybe the other guy. Okay. All right, maybe.
But
okay.
You know what? This is one of the things they don't do. They don't do a good flashback kind of at the end to sort of
show
the whole thing all the way through.
They don't. And spoiler alert, I feel like this does not have a satisfying ending. The
Yeah.
storyline does not have a satisfying
The
ending to it.
flashbacks in this episode in general do a really bad job. I think I underappreciated how useful they are into like understanding exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think they do a lot of weird ones, a bunch of fake ones, and so I felt like we needed the right one there at the
Mm-hmm.
end so you could really tie it all together.
Yeah. Jim Brass comes in, kind of takes Grissom away. Jim Brass is not happy about being put in the middle of this, which fair. It's not fun to be put in the middle of things. So he's
You mean about his bowling league?
yes, about the bowling league and about how the sheriff was or Mr. Harris was the best man in the sheriff's wedding, all that good stuff.
I still can't believe Grissom doesn't say anything about that.
Nope, never comes back up. And Grissom at this point is focused on one suspect, Mr. Harris. Like, he is convinced that it's Mr. Harris. We then return to the other storyline. We have Nick looking over the evidence, looking over Dylan's clothing, and he notices the same fiber on his boxers that they lifted off of the psychiatrist's top. So that's suspicious. We stay with this storyline. We go to Doc Robbins with Mrs. Buckley. He's repeatedly asking her, like, do you need a drive home? Can we arrange a drive home for you? She says she's fine. Nick walks up. They have a short conversation in the hallway. Nick then goes in to see Doc Robbins. And this is where Doc Robbins let him know that at first blush, it looks like a seizure, but there's a few concerning items, mainly that his torso is covered in bruises,
Yep.
which like is not easily explained by having a grand mal seizure, and that those same fibers were found all over his body,
Yeah.
which if he was wearing clothes, because when they came to the crime scene he was fully clothed, if he was wearing clothes, then why were these fibers all over his body? So Nick makes the call that he must have just been in his underwear, and why is he just in his underwear with his psychiatrist, which is a very fair question.
Yeah. So like this is actually the first time I think the fibers really matter. Earlier on, it's like, okay, if the supposition is this kid had a seizure, she held his head, she tried to make him safe. He hit his head. She tried to perform CPR, and she has a couple fibers on her lapel.
Yeah, like that's not a big deal.
That's super normal.
Yeah.
But you're like, wait, why is this kid absolutely covered in these fibers?
Yeah.
And we didn't find a blanket with the body, right? We didn't.
Right. No, he was fully
like,
clothed, just like on the ground, no blanket in sight.
Yeah. So it's like, then you're like, oh, okay, well now something's up.
Yeah. Yeah. So we then go to Grissom pulling up to HQ. A man approaches him and tells him that he has info about the Valenti case. And we learn that this guy was the previous union rep before Valenti, and that he is claiming that Bob Harris threatened him and his family. So he's basically confirming what Grissom thinks at this point, in that, like, let's keep an eye on Mr. Harris because, he's the guy.
I should have known something was up because I watched this scene and I was like, since when does Grissom not want to talk to somebody and pretend he's the detective in the case?
Yeah, I know, because he was just like, talk to Jim Brass. I don't need to talk to you.
I was like, oh, I should have known that this was going to be the guy.
Yeah. We have a short scene with Nick Catherine and Greg Sanders where we learn that the fiber that, is now all over the victim's body is Angora.
A little much, this scene.
The scene was weird. I feel like the scene was trying to interject humor into the episode, and it failed. It kind of flopped.
I kept waiting for like the fact that it was a sheep to matter.
No, yeah.
It's like milk, cheese, fiber. Like, what do these things have in common?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so this is going to come up again. It's going to be important that it's from a goat and not just any other fiber in the universe.
Nope.
No.
It does not come up again. I think I think that this was an attempt to interject some humor into an otherwise like not humorous episode, and it didn't play out well.
I keep trying to make Greg the class clown this season.
Yeah, for sure.
He's always quirky. Like, this is I don't know if this is a good way to phrase this. Like, he fills that role of like the Kramer or the Phoebe to refer to some of their shows in a lot of ways, or like the R2D2 or the C3PO. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
he's like a supporting character, but he's around a lot and he can make, weird. He can just be weird.
Yes.
But like this, they've taken it too far. He needs to have more of a base, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll see how Greg Sanders develops. So we then have Doc Robbins walking out of a room. Grissom approaches. He, wants to see the body again, and Doc Robbins is letting him know, like, no can do. Like, released the body 6 hours ago, so no longer in my possession. Sorry. Whoops.
Did you ever get
So
the idea that it had been 6 hours?
no, there's like no indication that there's been this length of time.
Like it would have to be the next day.
I don't know. This is so they go over their notes. This is where we learn that he had elevated iron. His skin was jaundiced. And Grissom is very interested in his testicles. He really wants to know what is up with Mr. Valente's testicles.
I think there's going to be like a testosterone thing.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah,
is that what
they
like for bodybuilders would take? And
yeah.
they like famously have shrunken testicles as a result.
Yeah.
Like, is it testosterone or is it something else? I don't know.
I think steroids.
Steroids. Yes,
steroids
I'm sorry.
shrink it.
That's what it is. I think it was going to be a steroid thing.
Yeah.
And the other reason I think that
spoiler
is,
alert.
I worked with a guy who was like a bodybuilder, like a semi-professional bodybuilder.
Okay.
And he literally came to work and he was completely jaundiced one day because he took this drug for way too long. That was supposed to help him build muscle. And I was like, you gotta go see I hope you're not taking this anymore. You're crazy, dude.
Yeah.
You're going to kill yourself. And so I've often associated that with steroids as well.
Yeah.
So I was like, small testicle, jaundiced kid. I said, oh yeah, I wonder if this is going to be a steroid. It was not.
It's not.
A steroid
It is not.
I don't know if there's any connection between iron and the steroid problem.
I have no idea.
Or if it's just circumstantial, but I was like,
I
think I might know a thing. And then
you were like, oh, I can contribute here. And you're like, wait, no. So Grissom walks into the break room where Warwick, Sarah, and Greg Sanders are. They're all waiting for a new case. Grissom's like, no, we're still working this case. So he tells Sarah to start processing the nail, and then he tells Warwick that he's with him. Which brings us to Grissom and Warwick at the funeral home.
Well, you can't skip over the crossword puzzle.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, so Greg Sanders made an origami figure out of the crossword puzzle, and that was a very large affront to Grissom.
Yeah, Grissom, we were apparently supposed to be obsessed with crossword puzzles, and I still feel like I'm not entirely sure they sold this the right way the first time, but they have now come back to it a couple times.
They have.
With him being a crossword puzzle maniac.
They have. So, I mean, at least that's a constant in the character that is Grissom. So Grissom and Warwick at the funeral home. Again, Grissom very interested in seeing the victim's testicles. So they're granted this request based on the fact that the funeral home director is starting a second business of crime scene cleanup, and Grissom says that he'll put him on the list. So,
our favorite funeral director of all time.
Yes.
I thought he was gonna like blackmail him, like
yeah.
Like,
you're like, we still know that you recycled caskets. We can bring that back up again. But no.
He does not have to play that card, I guess.
So this is where Grissom gets his wish, and we learn as the audience that the victim had testicular atrophy, so his testicles were the size of peas, and Grissom calls the combination of like the increased iron, the testicles, the jaundice, hemochromatosis is what I have in my notes.
Hemochromatosis.
Yes, hemochromatosis. And they end up taking a pint of his blood to go, which comes back a little bit later. So Sarah and Warwick are talking. They have gotten a thumbprint off of the nail, and they also realize that the metal cutters that had Bob Harris's prints on them are not the cutters that destroyed the prom.
Yep.
So they're not looking at the right set of cutters. We then have a scene with Nick and Catherine near at a hot dog cart, because Nick is getting a hot dog. And the detective shows up, lets him know that he got a limited warrant.
Can I have my retirement job being the guy who operates a hot dog cart in the middle of the desert of Las Vegas at what I assume is 5 a.m, since this is the overnight CSI shift?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
I was like, that guy definitely also sells drugs on
well,
top of
yeah,
hot dogs.
because those Nick and the detective are probably his only customers for the entire
No,
day.
they probably get the hot dogs for free so that they don't arrest him
Oh,
for
that's true. That's true. That's a
the
good point.
drugs. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the detective lets them know they get a limited warrant, and the only reason they got that warrant is because the psychiatrist's license was suspended at one point in the past because of having sex with an underage patient. So, yeah.
Which, she really tries to play down later, but
It doesn't help. It doesn't help. We'll get there. It
yeah.
doesn't. She does
I
try to
mean,
play it down, and I'm like,
let's
no, it's still uncomfortable and
the
inappropriate.
age the age part is like only part of the problem. The your patient part is the other part of the
The power
problem.
dynamic
Yeah.
is a big part of the issue. Like, you can take, if she had just had sex with a patient, even if the patient wasn't
Hmm.
underage, but I feel like the combination of underage and your patient is especially a type of power dynamic that should not be played down. And she's just trying to
Yeah.
be like, he wasn't that much younger than me. Like, that's her defense, basically,
Well,
is like,
yeah.
we were pretty close in age. It wasn't that big of a
We were in
deal.
love.
Yeah, we were in love.
Okay,
Yeah,
Juliet.
gross. So we go to Grissom. It's experiment time. He's like building this little contraption, and this is where we learn that there was enough iron in the victim's blood to conduct electricity. So we're one step closer to proving that this guy was electrocuted. We then go back to Nick, utilizing the limited warrant. He's in the psychiatrist's home. He's like picking up some fibers, and she's saying that she feels like a suspect. She's not feeling great about this interaction. And Nick is telling her, like, good, you should, you abuse
Yeah.
trust. Like, you shouldn't feel good right now. This is
Yeah.
not something, like, you shouldn't
This
be feeling great at the moment.
the scene was even harder to watch the second time because she's so like indefensible, but like then she just continues to lie.
Yes. Yeah.
So like it's like I don't.
I
It's
think
basically an
because,
act.
and I think because she thinks that she's right. That I think part of it is that
She doesn't think she
she
did anything
still
wrong.
she didn't do anything wrong. Like,
Yeah.
she
Okay.
understands. We can get there, but I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
So Catherine walks in. She found the Angora blanket. It was like tucked away in a closet somewhere. She finds the blanket. Catherine and Nick are walking out. Catherine asks Nick, like, what is going on with you? Because he's kind of like shutting her out, and he's not really working with her in the case. And he brushes it off at this stage. This comes back again pretty shortly after this point. But then we go back to Grissom. He's digging through the kitchen. He ends up taking Sarah's pickle.
Yep.
She got like a deli order. She got a pickle. He takes the pickle. So we're at experiment number 2.
Yep.
Now we're experimenting on a pickle with Grissom, well, running the experiment, but Sarah and Warwick are also there.
I thought he was gonna fill the pickle with blood. I really did.
Oh, did you really?
Yep.
I knew it was
I,
going to happen because obviously I've seen this scene enough times. So
I thought he was gonna like pour the pickle out,
that
fill it
is so funny.
with the guy's blood.
You were like,
I was
oh,
like,
I'm not going to be able to look
like,
at
the
pickles the
like,
same way.
yeah, like the pickles like represents like your skin and stuff, sure, but like you still need the blood. I mean, obviously, like, it makes sense at the end of the scene,
Yeah,
but
yeah. So
I was like, are they really gonna fill a pickle with blood here? And
they do not.
They do
Yes,
not.
they do not.
Thankfully.
So instead, they electrocute the pickle, and they realize, or Grissom shows them, that despite electrocuting the pickle, there are no burn marks on said pickle, just like there are no burn marks on their victim.
Yeah, I also completely disagree with
Oh, sodium
the
conducting the way
science.
iron conducts?
I mean,
Because that was his like theory.
I'm sure it does
Okay.
conduct. Like there's a lot of there's salt, right? So it's sodium and chloride ions. So there's a lot of capacity to conduct like salt water. I think probably is a better conductor than regular water. But I think the reason why the pickle doesn't burn is because it's wet.
Oh, yeah.
Not
Yeah.
the water is actually prevents like the arcing and the
Yep.
which is really like the resistive heat. Not that it's full of ions, but I'm not a chemist or an electrician, and I don't actually know if that's the answer. But I was kind of watching that scene, being like, I don't know if this is really true for the reason they say it's true, because you and I are full of a lot of water, and water is a pretty good conductor of
Right.
electricity.
Yeah, yeah.
And we would have burns. That's the whole
Yeah, yeah.
sort of natural state premise of this episode. So I don't know if like having some iron in your also like you get some pretty good arteries. It's like there's plenty of blood for electricity to travel through, but like it's still got to enter your skin. Like your skin is super dry,
Right.
and
Yeah.
so that was like I was like really confused with the pickle thing. And then I want to electrocute a hot dog because he said he has hot dogs up.
Yeah, that's what yeah,
But
that's
hot
how he
dogs
used to
tend
like
to
cook
be
his hot
kind of
dogs.
they tend to be pretty dry. And I mean, they could be as slimy or wet or like on the
Yep.
package.
Yep.
But if you like wipe them down, their skin is like the casing is pretty dry. So now I want to electrocute a hot dog and see what happens.
I mean, let me know if you want to set up an experiment. I have a package of hot dogs in my freezer right now.
I make sure I have a GCFI outlet available,
Yes, yes.
so I don't start a house fire.
Good idea. I don't want to burn your or my house down. So Greg Sanders enters. He got a thumbprint off of the nail.
Oh yeah.
And this brings us to Grissom with the sheriff. The thumbprint, not Bob Harris's.
Why? Why did it take them so long to run this thumbprint?
I don't know.
What happens to CSI time magic?
When it doesn't work for dramatic effect, it doesn't operate. It only operates when it fits into the dramatic effect of the episode.
I guess Greg was busy running 30 swabs, and
that is coming up in a second, actually. We haven't gotten there yet. We'll be there in just a bit. And this is where the sheriff tells Grissom that he needs to make a public apology because he was dragging Bob Harris through the mud, and it's time to admit. I guess enough that it got out to some degree. I
mean, they never cover that in the episode, so maybe a scene got cut or something happened.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
he definitely said it to the guy's face. Don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah, for sure. He called him, like he said it to him that he was a suspect. Yeah. So, and that might be enough because they're buddies. So we then go to Grissom and Jim Brass. Grissom wants Jim Brass to check out. Well, Jim Brass calls him Deep Throat. Ian Wolfe, the guy who approached Grissom in the parking lot. And
I can't imagine that anybody. I barely get that reference. I can't imagine anybody born after 1990 would ever get that reference.
Yeah. So then we go. This is the scene that you were hinting at. We go to Nick swabbing a blanket, and he's doing so many swabs. Like he's sectioning off the blanket.
I like his grid building.
I thought it was great.
It's really brought out my OCD love.
They definitely afterwards were kind of like, how many swabs do you need? And I was like, I mean, you don't know at what point a blanket was like touched or handled. To me, it made sense. I didn't think it was overkill, but they kind of suggest that it was overkill.
The only thing I didn't understand is why he needed to section it off. Like,
versus just finding it on the blanket, regardless of where it was on the blanket.
Like, the swab is only good for an area this big.
Yeah.
But I thought it was going to be like, oh, we're going to create a coordinate system, and then based on we're going to like recreate some scenario, and none of that came to fruition. There were a lot of times in this episode where I was like, oh,
yeah, we'll come back
cool.
to that.
They're going to do X, Y, or Z, and then like,
no, they don't. Nope. So David brings results to Nick. Catherine enters. This is where we learn that certain levels that in the victim indicate that there wasn't a seizure. Like certain levels in his blood would have been heightened or raised if he had had a seizure, right before death. And there was no indication that he had a seizure right before he died. And then there's a tense hallway walk and talk with Catherine and Nick, where Catherine threatens to remove Nick from the case because he's cutting her out and they're not acting like a team and he's kind of going rogue. And this is where we learn that Nick is personally vested in this case because he was assaulted by a babysitter when he was 9 years old. And to him, there are certain people that you should be able to trust. And when those people betray your trust, that is a gigantic affront.
Yeah. I actually, Nick feels like a very sort of like iconic, stereotypical maybe is the right word, like machismo role in this team sometimes.
Yes.
Like he's the guy's guy, like sports, works out,
Yeah.
Flirts with all the
Was having sex
girls.
with a stripper,
Yeah,
like
was in a fraternity,
yep.
right?
Yep.
Whenever
Yep.
they're investigating fraternity crimes, which has happened several times in 25 episodes.
It's not the last time that fraternities
Yeah,
will make an appearance in the show, can confirm.
but I think that you know it's great that they're using him to represent. I think I'm sure there's plenty of through all seasons of the show of sexual assault or
Yes. Yep.
what have you, where there's going to be a male aggressor and a predominantly identified female victim.
Yep.
That
Which is
this episode they've sort of made
which
space
is
for this.
statistically what
The most
happens the
likely, yeah,
most, but that is not
overwhelmingly,
that is not to discount the
yeah,
fact that men and boys can be victims as
yeah,
well,
yeah. But certainly at scale, like even in our
and assailants
country,
can be females.
yeah. I mean, yeah. So like even if it's like 85% to 15%, that still makes a lot of victims out there.
Oh yeah.
And so that kind of is great representation. But it's also great that they gave this to Nick and not to somebody else and give him a chance to be like more vulnerable in the show.
Yes. Yep.
Right. Which I like. It's a dynamic. I don't know if it's ever going to come up again. I do. It does feel a little bit like they were like, oh, we got to add some to Nick's background. And they just like work this in. I feel like that's half the reason this episode exists. Like it was almost like serving the point. So
Yep.
they could have done a better overall job, but I have a lot of criticisms of this episode, so I wanted to take a moment to give some praise. But also, I think that like it doesn't. If you're out in the universe and you don't feel like people support your marginalization because it's not the most predominant marginalization, that doesn't mean it's any less valid. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So, and that like it's good that people can get some recognition and they can feel like that story is being told somewhere. So that's I think one of my biggest takeaways from this episode is just like this show does a really good job of rounding the bases, so to speak, right? Like a lot of different variety in the sort of social plights in ways that lead up. They don't really just do the same thing over and over again.
I agree. So we go to Grissom and Jim Brass with Ian, the deep throat gentleman, and we.
Nobody wants to be referred to as a deep throat gentleman. Oh, that's not true. I'm sure there's a lot of
I
guys out
mean,
there
no, there's
who
people
don't
that want
mind
to
being
be.
referred to as the deep
That's a
throat
true
gentleman.
story. I don't think this character would want to be referred to that way.
A lot of cis heteronormative guys would take
Would
umbrage
not.
for that.
Yes. Yes.
But maybe that's
But
more reason to refer to them that way.
but we learned that I think it was like a week before or 2 weeks before this victim's death, Ian took a sledgehammer to him.
Yeah.
So there was already some bad blood between the victim and Ian here. So
This reminds me of the Taylor Swift music video, Bad Blood, actually.
Oh, does it?
Which I believe also involves a sledgehammer.
Oh, funny. We then go to Nick and Catherine with Greg Sanders. We learned that there are skin cells all over the blanket from the victim, from the psychiatrist, but also from Mom. Which, let's just make this uncomfortable situation even more uncomfortable by adding in the fact that evidently she was involved in whatever was going on.
Or the ghost of his father.
Yes, or the ghost of his father was shedding epithelials onto the blanket.
Maybe
we know that ghosts do that.
Maybe he has some of his ashes and he's just rolling around in them.
Yeah, maybe that's it. And spoiler, that's not it.
Also,
so
epithelial, your skin cells definitely don't survive the burning of your.
No, they definitely do not. No. That would compromise them beyond repair. We go back to storyline A with Grissom and Sarah, and we learned that the thumbprint is a match to Ian, and now they just need to place him at the crime scene. So they know that he is the one who, or they think he is the one that put the boot in the victim's, or the nail in the victim's boot, but they need to place him at the crime scene. And then Catherine and Nick are back with Doc Robbins. They're asking about the Y incision. And then we also learn that those same fibers that were all over his body were also inside. They were like in his nose cavity. They were in his lungs, which that's weird.
That's very weird.
Like, that's especially weird. It's weird to be covered on them from the outside, especially be weird to be covered in them on the inside. So this brings us to Catherine and Nick with the mom and the psychiatrist. And this is where we finally learn that they were trying a quote unquote technique called rebirthing, which they claim the victim agreed to and agreed to participate in. And they, made him go down to his boxers. They wrapped him in the blanket, and then they mimicked the like motion of the birth canal and contractions and such. And he was supposed to basically fight his way back into the world. So he was supposed to be reborn.
This was somehow supposed to make him
love his mom,
like his mom more.
Yeah,
he currently resents her.
Yeah, which
I'm not sure.
No, I didn't connect the dots there. No. So yeah, that's how he died. Was struggling to breathe, wrapped in an Angora blanket, and then as they're kind of pushing on him and putting pressure on him, they like smack his head against the ground, which is where that big wound on the back of his head came from. So
I want to know why the doctor owns such shoddy blankets that shed so many fibers.
And also are not breathable.
Yeah. I'm one of those people who like doesn't want to ever cover his head with his blanket.
No, me neither.
In my head, I think I'm going to suffocate to death. But like Tara, my partner, has a like 80-pound weighted blanket.
Oh, I love weighted blankets.
And she literally just puts it over her head and sleeps every night.
Yeah. Yeah.
Blankets are usually quite breathable.
Yes. Probably for reasons like this. So,
but like he doesn't suffocate as much. I mean,
no, they like crush him basically. Loose. Yeah.
They're getting our lungs, but yeah, they whack his head against the ground, throwing him around.
Yeah.
All I can think is like, this is like the most, this is like whatever version of a definition of kidnapping you can come up with, this is going to apply to. You took a child, you wrapped him in a sack.
Yes.
And held him there against his will.
Yes.
At the end of this whole thing, I did not get the impression that they were charging anyone with anything. And
they never,
like they should.
They never, we kind of end the scene with the psychiatrist saying that they didn't do anything wrong. They didn't tell them the truth because they knew they wouldn't understand.
Yeah, they don't think they did anything wrong.
But that they did nothing wrong. And just like you're saying, we don't get any clarification on if charges are being brought or not, which lends me to think like you that they're not, because wouldn't they have said it otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like in most states, the parents control the rights of their children to consent to things from a medical standpoint.
But there's child endangerment.
Yeah. Well, the real question is, how far out is her rebirthing thing? Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you were like, oh, I want my child to have this elective surgery, whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then like they had it, and you could be like, well, yeah, they wanted it too, but like, who knows how much they really wanted it. If they're dead, you can't ask them.
Right.
And they died due to a complication of the surgery. You would never charge the mother and the doctor with, reckless endangerment.
But I think the fact that this is not an accepted therapeutic practice, like they admit that it's not an accepted therapeutic practice. So
yeah. But if you were like, oh yeah, we were going to try to like sew a third leg onto them because we think it looks cool.
Yeah.
And then they would be like, yeah, that's child endangerment. You're going to jail. You didn't need to do that. Like the average doctor would not have suggested this. Like, then that would be child endangerment. And so, yeah, they would definitely be charged. But they just kind of like leave it be. Again,
they just let it. That's the end of storyline B. And so we go back to our main storyline. We have Warwick, Sarah, and Grissom, and they are looking at striations. So they're looking at striations from the prong, and also from, I assume, like a test thing they did with tools that they took from Ian. And we have a nice little matchy-matchy. Warwick does the match.
Classic matchy-matchy with Warwick.
Yep. Warwick is the matchy-match man. And so this also then lends Warwick to admit to Grissom that both he and Sarah let Grissom down. And Grissom, instead of, again, this does sort of explain some of his weird behavior, but Grissom, instead of being like, hey, like I've told you to not step outside the lines before in
You didn't let me
cases.
down. Yeah.
You didn't let. He's like, yeah, you did. You did give up too soon. And I was like, wow, Grissom,
Worst boss ever.
such a terrible boss, such a horrendous boss. So our horrible boss, Grissom, and Jim Brass arrive back at the worksite. They confront Ian. They arrest him. We never really learn why he kills
Well, yeah,
the victim. Like they had an
What?
incident before, and then
But we don't know why.
he was kind of like trying to frame Bob Harris. So like, was the point more to frame Bob Harris? But like, they
Who
don't
knows?
go into it at all, which is strange. And as they're walking Ian out, Sheriff calls him over, and he kind of tells Grissom that he doesn't have to, he's not going to come out looking like the hero, but he doesn't have to make any big public apology now that he has found the killer and has basically exonerated Bob Harris as having any involvement. And that is the end of our episode.
The end.
So, Nick, what did you think about this week's episode? I already know this answer, but tell our listeners what you think about this week's episode.
This is probably a top 3 episode so far this season.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I know so far. Yeah,
So
it's
far.
episode 3.
It's episode 3.
Yeah, it's definitely in 3rd place.
Yep.
I think it will be in a top 3 in our. If you haven't seen our bonus episode from last season, we review our favorite and least favorite episodes.
Yeah.
I would not be surprised. Actually, no. Yeah, I would not be surprised if this episode made it into that bonus episode for this season, but not as a top 3, more of a bottom 3.
Yes. So
I will definitely be making a note in my notebook so that I can easily find this episode later.
Nick has sent me for those who have either listened to the recap or really listened to, we brought it up several times throughout season 1. Nick sent me a message earlier and was like, I think this might be the airplane episode of this season. And I was like, that's fair.
Yeah. Which I actually had to check to make sure the airplane episode wasn't episode 3.
I think it's episode 6. I think it's episode
9.
6 or 7.
It's actually
it's 9.
way later,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Weird. I thought it was 6 or 7.
Yeah, I looked it up because I was like, because if that's true, then episode 3 is cursed.
Yeah, you were like, oh my gosh, if this is both number 3. Okay. Yeah, I thought it was 6 or 7. But okay,
episode 3 is Crate and Burial.
Oh yeah, you actually you kind of like that episode.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Which it might have been in your bottom 3.
I think it was in my bottom 5.
5? Oh yeah.
Yeah,
right.
I think it was in my bottom 5, but not in my bottom 3.
Yeah, I think that was in my top 5, but not my top 3.
Yeah.
I actually kind of like that episode.
Yeah. So I mean, I think as we mentioned, this is
ends.
So many loose ends, so many things that get brought up and then never brought back up, or they don't come to any satisfying conclusion. I guess the ending of storyline B is at least somewhat satisfying. We get an answer, we know what happened, but we're still left with are they being charged? Maybe no.
There was a scene during this episode, the first time I watched it, where I went, "Wait, what case are they talking about right now?"
Yeah, you're like, "What are we doing?"
Maybe I can't capture it for the words for it, but there was something about this episode that is just a little disjointed.
Yes.
They're missing the mark in a few places that it just does not rise to the quality level of a good CSI episode. And I would probably, you always know when you're watching these episodes twice in a row, when you go to watch the episode, you're like, the second time you're kind of like,
I gotta watch this again.
And the notes, I don't have a lot of notes. I actually didn't even I only have 5 things in my entire notebook, and I don't even talk about half of them.
Yeah, because they weren't that.
They aren't even that good.
Yeah.
Half the notes I take are just kind of thoughts.
Yeah.
Or asides, and so real meat on the bone moments, and you're just kind of following them along. You're like, okay, where is this going? It doesn't capture you, right? It's not enticing.
It's not an engaging episode by any stretch of the imagination.
If this was a pilot episode, it would not have gotten picked up, I think.
No. I think this is I think in our recap we talked about this. If there was an episode to recommend to somebody to get them to be like, oh, you're gonna love this show, watch this episode, this would not be the episode. No. I would not recommend this episode to get somebody interested in watching CSI who had previously not watched CSI.
So we will not speak of this episode again until we get to our bonus episode, and then
Yeah.
maybe
Maybe we'll talk about it again. But we will talk about CSI some more. Next week, we will be back with Season 2, Episode 4, Bully for You. In the meantime, you can find us on Facebook at Who Are You, a CSI podcast. We are also on Twitter/X, Instagram, and Threads at Who Are You, CSI pod. And you can email us at whoareyoucsipod@gmail.com. But otherwise, we will talk to you next week.
No spoilers.
No spoilers.